Okay, let's see what you guys think about these questions. Number one, how would you describe the protagonist? So the group I talked to mentioned some important details about Sonny's brother. He is a high school math teacher. So you can imagine the kind of person that could be. Now, in real life, many different kinds of people can teach high school math. But in fiction, there is a reason the author gives this character this job. And that's what we're talking about. So the stereotype of a high school math teacher is like someone who thinks very logically and rationally, tries to be objective, tries to lead a morally good life, tries to be a role model, right? And has very straightforward ideas of what life could be like. So this kind of person, when Sonny tells him he wants to play music, his first reaction is, well, how will you make a living? When Sonny uses drugs, his reaction is, he's such a good boy. Why would he do that? I think it's safe to say that for most people in life who behave irrationally, our protagonist might not care. But because it is his own younger brother, Sonny, and he sees Sonny's life and he thinks that Sonny is destroying himself, he wants to try to help his brother or to save his brother. And to do that, he needs to be able to communicate with Sonny. And to do that, he needs to be able to understand Sonny. And so, not for anyone, but only for his dear younger brother, is our upright, uptight, white leaning protagonist willing to step outside of his comfort zone and consider another person's life experience. Make no mistake, he's a black man, but his values are very close to the American middle class values, right? If you do well and you make people like you and you follow the rules, you can get ahead in life. Very mainstream way of thinking. And in the United States, the mainstream is white. So our main character has been designed to be close to or resembling a white person. Interesting, right? So when we follow the main character in trying to understand Sonny's decisions, we are actually trying to get from a white perspective to a different perspective. And that kind of hints at why James Baldwin wanted to write this story in the first place. Maybe he's writing it for a white reader who wants to learn more about why black people can't seem to follow the rules, why black people must insist on having such a different culture, these kinds of questions. Okay, do you have other thoughts about the first question? All right, moving on. Question two, why does the story use flashback? So the middle part has to do with when they're younger, one day at sunset, as the day was getting dark, our protagonist is told by his mother to look after Sonny. And when he doesn't understand why such a good boy would need someone to take care of them, his mother tells him the story about how he once had an uncle who was killed by a drunk white guy for fun. And that life is not as straightforward as our protagonist wants it to be. And this flashback is stuck between two parts of the story. One is when the beginning of the story, when our protagonist learns that Sonny had been caught and sent to jail for using drugs. And then after the flashback ends, we can take a look at this. I'm going to jump. Um, so when the flashback ends, uh, time moves faster. It's not just, oh, we're back in the present, but it starts from the past and it moves very fast to bring us back to the present. So it seems like it's, according to the group I talked with, this flashback is adding important information, explaining kind of why Sonny might uh, behave like this, why there might be a wider world or a wider culture than our protagonist likes to think about in his daily life. And it's also, this is quite interesting, right? Because, like, without this part, we're missing a very important piece of information. But if we take it out and we only look at our main character's behavior, this is something that is his memory. He knows what, like, this has happened before. And yet he still behaves like a white person, like he doesn't understand why black people would behave this way. So it's important information for the reader, but it's also a reminder for the main character. At that moment, he remembers this key moment in his past. And it's kind of like the first step outside of his comfort zone to try to understand his own brother again. But another part of this question is, why is it stuck in the middle of the story? Why is it's in the past, so why is it not at the beginning of the story? And this group said, well, it's important information, but you don't know it's important until you see um, the main character's reaction to Sonny's uh, being caught. Right? Only when the main character starts asking, why would Sonny do this, does this information become important. If you give the answer before the question, people may not realize it is the answer. The question must come first. So it comes in the middle of the story, roughly like as early as it could be. Any earlier in the story, and this flashback would not make sense. Okay, other thoughts or questions about number two? All right, let's look at question three. How would you explain the darkness? 55 to 56 is where we first get a mention, a deep discussion of this idea. Um, yes, so bottom of 55, he's remembering, our main character is remembering his mother after the big Sunday dinner. So it's the night is creeping up outside. You can see the darkness growing against the window panes. Okay, so it's physical darkness at first, but then uh, it's real quiet in the room, even indoors. Every face looks darkening, like the sky outside. So now we're entering something symbolic. It's not just visual darkness anymore. Everyone is looking at something a child can't see. The silence, the darkness coming, and the darkness in the faces frightens the child obscurely. Obscure means here vague, unclearly. He hopes that the hand which strokes his forehead will never stop, will never die. Okay, so as the group I discussed this with mentions, we now go from physical darkness to death, which is traditionally linked with darkness. So it's something symbolic related to death. And then Near the bottom of this page, the protagonist's mother says to him, I don't know if I'll ever see you again after you go off from here, but I hope you'll remember the things I tried to teach you. And of course, the main character says, don't worry, you'll be alive a long time yet. And then his mother says, I want to talk to you about your brother, Sonny. If anything happens to me, he ain't going to have nobody to look out for him. So his mother is asking him to take care of his younger brother if she dies. But of course, at this point, she's not very old. So our main character says, Mama, ain't nothing going to happen to you or Sonny. Sonny's all right. He's a good boy and he's got good sense. So he's saying, don't worry about Sonny. He's smart. He's good. He'll do fine. And his mother replies, it ain't a question of his being a good boy, nor of his having good sense. It ain't only the bad ones, nor yet the dumb ones that get sucked under. So she's saying, yes, he's good, he's smart, but being good and being smart does not guarantee that he will stay safe, does not guarantee that he will stay alive. So we now have a new idea from physical darkness to symbolic darkness to death. And now we have unpredictability. No moral system can tell you whether you live or you die, how long you will live, when you will die. And, that's kind of true for everyone, right? We can't predict when we're going to die. We can guess, but we can't really know. So death itself is inherently unpredictable. But this is something more. And to help explain why, his mother brings up the story of their uncle that they never knew about. And what happens to this uncle is one Saturday night, they're a little drunk and they're kind of walking down a hill, and there's a road behind them. And he decides to run down this hill. Then they hear a car motor, and his brother starts crossing the road. The car was full of white men. They were all drunk. And when they seen your father's brother, they let out a great whoop and holler, and they aimed the car straight at him. They was having fun. They just wanted to scare him, the way they do sometimes, but they was drunk. And I guess the boy, meaning his father's brother, being drunk too and scared, kind of lost his head. By the time he jumped, it was too late. Your father says he heard his brother scream when the car rolled over him, and he heard the wood of his guitar when it broke. Um, and he heard them strings go flying. He heard them white men shouting, and the car kept on a going, and it ain't stopped till this day. So, how did his uncle die? Because a group of drunk white men driving a car wanted to have some fun, and they misjudged the distance, and so he died. I'm sure most of us, I guess almost all of us will die. I can't know 100%, but most of us will die. And most of us will die unpredictably, but not like this. I don't think anyone here will die being chased down by a group of drunk men. Hopefully not. But as his mother says, that car ain't stopped till this day. Things like this still happen today in this story. So it's not just unpredictable death, it's unpredictable death by a fellow human being who doesn't care about your life, who doesn't face consequences if they kill you on purpose or accidentally. It's enough trying to stay alive when there are natural disasters, when there are like real accidents. It's so much harder to stay alive when there are people walking around, driving around who don't care if you live or die, and you live in the same society with them. The example that I gave to this group was, imagine that you look around the classroom and somebody is secretly a serial killer. So this is what the story calls the darkness. Thoughts or questions? Okay, question 4. The beauty of life was all within, but maybe that's the trouble. So, uh, in this part, let's go to page 66. The protagonist is talking with Sonny about suffering. To understand why they're talking about suffering, I think it helps if you understand what heroin does. Heroin is a kind of drug called a downer. It calms you down. It makes you feel less anxious. It makes life feel okay. It's not like cocaine. Cocaine is an upper. Cocaine makes you energetic and full of like initiative. And sometimes if you take too much, it gives you anxiety. But heroin settles you down. You can imagine why someone like Sonny would want to take heroin if every day he's facing his own personal darkness. Heroin can help him calm down and get through another day. I once read a very powerful account of why heroin is so dangerous. And it goes something like this. Everybody has stress in their life, and we all manage that stress better or worse. But what if you could take something and it would make that stress go away for a little while? You know it's bad, right? Everybody tells you, don't do drugs. You know you shouldn't. But what if one day there's so much stress and anxiety, you can't handle it, it feels like you can't make it to the end of the day. You just take a little bit. It helps you get to the end of that day. What's the harm, right? Just once. And so you take it, it helps, and then you stop, you don't take it, nothing bad happens. Okay, I guess people are just trying to scare me about this heroin thing. And then another day comes, and another day, and one day you have again so much stress. And you remember, last time this happened, I took a little heroin and it worked. So you take it again. And it works again, but not as well as the last time. And you think, oh, so I guess I need to take a little bit more, just a little bit. It can't hurt, right? And so every time you encounter a day of massive stress, you take a little bit more heroin. And the person you buy it from sees that you keep coming back and you keep buying more. So they lower the quality and they raise the price. And now you feel like anytime you have big stress, you depend on this magical drug. And you depend on that person selling it to you. And you see your money flowing out of your pockets, but you feel like it's worth it because it's helping me get through the day. That's addiction. And that's the kind of thing that Sonny's brother is so scared of. Like, yes, maybe it helps Sonny once, but what if Sonny depends on it? And what if one day Sonny takes too much? So heroin is a bad solution to the problem of suffering. So that's what they're talking about here, suffering. So things like, uh, so they just heard a woman singing with like a jazz band outdoors on the sidewalk. And Sonny says, when he hears that music, I think about how much suffering she must have had to go through to sing like that. It's repulsive to think you have to suffer that much. Like, suffering is such a bad thing. It can't be worth suffering so much just to be good at music, right? And his brother says, but there's no way not to suffer, is there, Sonny? And Sonny says, I believe not, but that's never stopped anyone from trying, has it? No, there's no way not to suffer, but you try all kinds of ways to keep from drowning in it, to keep on top of it, and to make it seem, well, like you did something. All right, and now you're suffering for it, you know? Why do people suffer? Maybe it's better to do something to give it a reason, any reason. So, yes, everyone suffers. And sometimes, though, a person suffers so much, they start asking why. It seems like I'm the only one who's suffering so much. Why me? What did I do to deserve this? And so Sonny says, for these people, maybe it's better to do something to give it a reason, any reason. For your sanity, because you cannot stop asking why. Sometimes a person might suffer so much, they'll do something to justify their suffering. They feel like God is punishing them, so they do something that is worth punishing them for. I don't know if that makes sense to you, and I hope you never experience that. But the human mind works in very strange ways. If you can't find a reason, you make a reason. And so his brother, this seems to be kind of explaining why Sonny willingly broke the law to use drugs. First, heroin helps his suffering, but also doing something illegal seems to justify his suffering. Right? At first, he's suffering for no reason, but after breaking the law, then he can say, I'm suffering because I broke the law. But of course, we, the readers, we just read that passage about the darkness. So we know that this suffering is not, the reason for this suffering is not to be found in black people, is to be found in a society that lets white people kill black people for fun and lets them get away with it. But of course, that's not something that Sonny himself can change. So, against this idea that maybe it's better to do something to give suffering a reason, Sonny's brother says, but we just agreed there's no way not to suffer. Isn't it better then just to take it? And Sonny says, but nobody just takes it. That's what I'm telling you. Everybody tries not to. You're just hung up on the way some people try. It's not your way. So Sonny is saying, ha ha ha, just take it. That doesn't work. Everybody finds their own way to deal with it. You just don't like my way. And his brother says, it's not about like what I think. I just care how you suffer. And so these ideas are what this is about. I wanted to talk about willpower and how life could be, well, beautiful. I wanted to say that it was all within. The it here referring to suffering and how we respond to suffering. I wanted to say that it was all within. It's all inside ourselves. But was it? Or rather, wasn't that exactly the trouble? So this is the crux of the question that I discussed with this group. The idea that suffering only depends on yourself and your own responses, that you can control your own suffering. Why is that idea problematic? What kind of problems might come from this idea? And the group I talked with offered two answers. One, if you are the sole arbiter of your suffering, if you are the only person who can say how much suffering is too much suffering for yourself, you might misjudge. You might take on too much suffering more than you can handle. The second possible answer is related to this. It is the idea that if you are the only source of your suffering, if you are the only person who can deal with your suffering, then when you can't take it anymore, how do you ask for help? When other people see you suffering, how can they help you if it all depends on yourself? And this is the question that Sonny's brother is struggling with. So in this sentence, I wanted to say that it was all within. This seems to be what Sonny's brother originally thought. But after having this conversation, after caring so much about his brother, he realizes this probably isn't true. But was it? Did it all depend on the self only? Because this is what he's trying to do, right? He's trying to help his brother. If his brother's suffering only depends on Sonny himself, how can his brother help him? That's the trouble. Okay, do you have other thoughts or questions about number 4? If not, let's move on to the last question. Why is this story so damn long? So the group I talked to first thought about like cutting some of the emotional details. To tell a story, this group was thinking, you don't need to emphasize every single moment. You don't need to emphasize all of those emotions. And so one example they gave was at the very beginning of the story when, yeah, I jumped too much. When our protagonist just hit it in the paper, in the subway on my way to work. I read it and I couldn't believe it. So according to the answer from this group, you could stop the sentence here. You don't need the rest of this paragraph. And the rest of this paragraph says, and I read it again. Then perhaps I just stared at the newsprint spelling out his name, spelling out the story. I stared at it in the swinging lights of the subway car and in the faces and bodies of the people, in my own face, trapped in the darkness which roared outside. In terms of the plot, yes, this paragraph is saying, I read his name in the paper and I couldn't believe it. So why is all this other stuff in here? We can take a closer look at this. What is it doing? It's describing his actions. It's describing what's going on inside his mind. It's describing the environment. And there's foreshadowing, trapped in the darkness which roared outside. This is the first mention of the darkness in this story, which later becomes very important. So symbolically, we also have the main character stuck inside a space, unable to deal with the darkness that is outside of the subway. Kind of like he is stuck inside his own life, unable to deal with the darkness around his own idea of his life. So we have symbolism, we have situational details. If you add all this together, it's not just telling us that the protagonist can't believe what he just read in the paper. It's putting us in his shoes. It's putting us in the situation so that we can feel what he feels. And that is mostly what uh, the emotional aspects of this story are doing. If you only focus on the plot, yes, we can get through the story much faster, but you only see what's happening. You don't feel what's happening. And for this story specifically, the feeling is so important. As the group I was discussing with realized, if this story is written for a reader who knows that Black people are suffering under racism and oppression, but they don't truly feel what that means, then in order to help this reader truly understand what it is like to be a Black person living in the United States in the 1960s, the story needs to make them feel that experience. It's kind of like, uh, it's very popular today for teachers like myself to talk about, like, don't bully your classmates. If you see bullying, tell a teacher, things like that. And everybody knows this. But if a student has experienced bullying before, these ideas, the importance of these ideas feels very different. If you are lucky to have never been bullied before, it's kind of like, oh, yeah, yeah, I know. Yeah, this is what we should do. But for someone who has experienced it before, they truly understand why the government and the school and we teachers care so much about bullying. That's the difference. So for this story that is we can even say, trying to help white people understand what it is truly like to be Black in America, the feeling part, the emotional part is the most important. And it is also the feelings and the emotions that help our protagonist understand his brother. As a math teacher in high school, he is an educated man. He reads the newspapers. He understands the society that he lives in, but he doesn't feel what his brother and his people are going through. And so by the end of the story, he does have some of these feelings. Um, let's see. So at the end of the story, he's attending his brother's band performance. And then he starts thinking and feeling about like freedom, uh, that music could help us to be free if we listen. He thinks about uh, experiences that will continue on throughout the rest of life. Thinks about the long line of which we knew only mom and daddy, so his ancestors, his family, his mother, that dead uncle, his own daughter, and his wife, and the whole world outside. So it is through music, it is through that emotional connection with his brother that he is able to step outside of his own life experience, step outside of his own values to truly understand another person. And so this group agreed. It's not worth cutting out all the emotion. You lose too much. So the story is this long for a good reason. Questions about today's discussion? Okay, so before next week, please read The Ones Who Walk Away from Omelas by Ursula K. Le Guin. This is her most famous short story. Ursula K. Le Guin is one of the most famous science, or was, she's now dead, science fiction and fantasy writers in the United States. She is the most important one of the late second half of the 20th century. She has like numerous achievements, won many prizes, but what really makes her work special is that her parents were anthropologists and sociologists, 人类学家, 社会学家. So when she writes about a science fictional world or a fantasy world, she's not just giving us a story. She thinks a lot about the world itself. How does it work? What do people care about? How do they live? What do they eat? How are their relationships between genders? How many genders? These questions are very much important to her. And so like some people even call her fiction anthropological fiction, 人类学式的小说. This short story looks like it's about one such society that looks like a utopia on the surface, 根本像是乌托邦, but it's hiding a dark secret. But what the story is also about is how do we think about society? How do we think about happiness? Is there a kind of balance? Is there a kind of cost? And are we willing to pay that cost? Okay, so please read that before next week.